Give me that microphone. Give me that microphone. Is this
The moment I've been waiting for is finally knocking at my door. My day up in the sun is just a ride. The world is mine and it's my stage. I'm owning this, I came to play. Just shout out, scream it out and testify. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3. I'ma give 'em a sight to see. Buckle on up and get ready. Hello, testing 1, 2, 3.
The new Super 35 sensor that Canon have introduced with the C300 Mark III is quite a big step up from other S35 sensors that they have created before. From the body and the flexibility that gives us in terms of the expansion packs and the interchangeable mount, to the sensor with its increased dynamic range for tackling scenes that possibly we couldn't have tackled or captured faithfully before, I can get more out of this camera. My money goes further. It's as simple as that from a business standpoint. From a creative point of view, it's unquestionably unlocking more creative avenues for us as filmmakers.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Pro VTV. Thank you all very much for joining us today. So we have got another stream on the Canon R5C with us. We've just finished a whole batch of the content that we managed to record with the R5C when we had the camera before launch. We've just put out a series of technical tests on the camera, and before that we had several live streams with Ollie Kensington, with media, and obviously several streams of our own. Today I am joined by Lee Brimble and Stuart Morgan, who are two of our customers, two filmmakers that specialise in automotive work. I mean, you do a variety of work, don't you, chaps? But would you say you specialise in automotive?
Yeah, it's an area that certainly we kind of, well, Lee's certainly more than me. Lee's kind of 90% automotive, and I'm probably about 35-40% automotive. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, but you did an automotive shoot with the R5C before the launch, which I guess is where all this comes from. But for now, thank you so much for joining me on this. Anyone watching this, as we go throughout, any comments that you leave in the chat here on YouTube, we've got Barry from Canon joining us, who's going to answer any technical questions which might not come up in the stream. If there's anything for the guys, then I will bring that up as we chat through. We've got a few slides which the guys have chucked together for this, which I guess we'll work through to give ourselves a little bit of structure, shall we, guys? And I think they start with introducing the two of you. So do you guys want to take it away?
Yeah, I mean, Lee and I have worked together now generally on car stuff now for probably over 10 years. And it's interesting that Lee's obviously come from a primarily stills background, where I'm the opposite. I've come from a video background. And we've come together really on the basis that a lot of the shoots now for the car manufacturers demand stills and video to be shot as part of the same shoot. So we've sort of been thrown together really by chance. And
Sure.
Yeah, we've enjoyed working with each other that much that we kind of formed up and teamed up for as many jobs as we can to get the best of both worlds, really. So but my background has been sort of 20 years in print, dealing with media and a different type of media, but involved in the colour and the technical side of it, which I enjoy. And I've ran my own sort of filmmaking company now for 15 years. So it's, like I said, a good chunk of that is 35-40% is cars, but I do a lot of stuff in the military, a lot of equine stuff, fishing, specialist stuff, all sorts. So it's a real varied mix for myself. So but then I'll let you hear from Lee.
Sure, we have just lost Lee. I'm just getting him
It's all right.
back a little bit. You're here.
There you go.
There we go.
Yeah, slight
So-
technical, sorry.
It's all right, we're back in. So, Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Basically, I've been a professional photographer for over 20 years now. I don't only shoot cars, but many people say it's sort of my speciality, if you like, is cars. Work ranges from editorial to above the line ad campaigns, and I've been shooting videos since the 5D came out back in the day, and moved on to some cinema only cameras, if you like, from Sony and Red, and then now I'm pleased to say I'm back on Canon with the C70 and the R5.
So I think we've got some examples of your work, George. If you could cut to the slides, there's some beautiful shots of cars here. So this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So this is the day-to-day bread and butter, is it?
Yeah, that's the editorial stuff. Again, that's the top of the game. That was actually shot. This one here was shot last year on the R5. It was a Bentley above the line campaign, and it was one of my first shoots with the R5 actually, and managed to persuade the client that the R5 would have enough pixels, because they normally prefer you shoot Hasselblad ad-wise, but there was a lot of action involved, and I just prefer using DSLRs for action or digital.
The movement in this shot is great because at first glance you don't realise that it's moving. It looks like a parked car. You're just drawn straight away to the car, and then you realise no, that car's moving and the camera's moving and all the rest of it as well.
Yeah.
How do you go about that? Is that are you moving in a car, or are you just panning left and right?
Moving extremely slowly. I mean, there's lots of ways you can achieve this nowadays. Back in the day, it used to be just a carbon fibre and glass rig that would be attached to the far side of the car, and then it comes out and goes up to sort of 9-12 meters away from the car, and then you just move the car very slowly with a long shutter.
Gotcha.
This one was done slightly differently. It still had like a motion control unit that the camera was on, and then several plates put in. So
it's very effective. That car's pin sharp.
Yeah, I mean, if you're just doing a pan, then not all the car would be sharp.
Exactly.
The back of the car would off. So rigs was really the only way you could get the whole bodywork pin, and yet still get movement in the background on the wheels.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. And this is you on Top Gear.
Yeah, I also shoot behind the scenes on Top Gear. A lot of travelling, but it's really enjoyable shoot to do.
Cool. So that's a bit of background. Let's move on to the new camera then. So before we get to your shoot with the R5C, let's just chat a little bit about where you were already with Canon, because I know you were using the C70 and the R5. And what was life like in terms of your shooting kit before the R5C?
Well, pretty much it was identical for both of us actually, because we kind of came back to Canon pretty much simultaneously, and the first camera we bought was the C70, so we were one of the first guys obviously to get hold of that camera when it came out, and it still remains at the moment one of the most enjoyable cameras to shoot with that I've ever played with. It's still, I wouldn't say it's my absolute favourite camera in Canon, because the R5C is vying for that position at the moment. But the combination of the R5 and the C70 was pretty much perfect for what we both do, because you can go from Lee primarily shooting stills on the R5, and I'll be shooting straight away after the same scene with the C70. We generally use the C70 for a lot of our car rigging, so if it's going on to a car mount or a gimbal mounted onto a van or a tracking vehicle, then we find the C70 is the kind of preferred camera for that. And then if you're shooting from leaning on a cine saddle or hanging out the window or at the back of the van, shooting freestyle handheld, then that was with the R5. So,
and what was pushing you towards each camera in those two situations?
I think I don't want to speak for Lee, but I would say the stills quality of the R5 is pretty sensational with the 45 megapixel sensor.
It's certainly better than the C70 stills quality.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I wouldn't pitch C70 as a stills camera. But no, I'm kind of coming at it more from a video point of view. So I would say that the C70 is more me as an A camera, and the R5 was maybe a B camera. Whereas I think probably for you, Lee, it was different, wasn't it?
Yeah, just the other way around, and that's why me and Stuart work together quite a lot. If sometimes I get a still shoot that also requires video, I can then concentrate on the stills. Stuart helps me out with lights and stuff. It was I'm shooting stills, and then also shoots video. And then when we need to shoot the video, then I'll just use mine R5 as a B cam, and Stu's using his A cam for the C70. And likewise the other way around. If Stu's on a video shoot, he then uses me as a B cam a lot.
Yeah, and Carl, one of the reasons I think that we use you asked kind of where we were kind of position wise with cameras, is one of the things it's coming back to Canon that, I mean, it's always been Canon's strong point, and I think you probably agree that whichever Canon camera you pick up, whether it was a 5D Mark III or a C100, C300, and we've used pretty much all of them, they play very nicely together as a suite of cameras. So I always find that they're not difficult to match colour-wise in post. I think the look is generally that kind of Canon look, which we like. But it seems to be that you can switch profiles, from log to wide DR or standard profiles, and I never seem to have too much problem in post-production getting the cameras into a nice place. There's none of this, we've had plenty of cameras in the past where you're shooting log and having to overexpose 2 stops to protect the blacks and all the rest of it. And since using these recent cameras from Canon, especially the C70 with the DGO sensor, it's just kind of all of that's gone away. We just get correct exposure irrespective of which profile you might be in, and there's no kind of fear in the background that is it going to match, is it going to be noisy. I just think the Canon is their time at the moment. I think they've really got that right in these latest cameras.
Yeah, and the colours just look great straight off the bat, don't they? That's the thing. They just look tremendous in camera.
And in terms of the colours on the Canon, one thing I really like about them from a post-production point of view is that, you know, you can treat them sort of whatever way you want in post-production. The colours end up looking quite good, whereas there are, you know, a lot of other cameras out there which look exceptional in terms of colour, but you've sort of got to follow the right post workflow, if you know what I mean. Whereas Canon's, you know, I tend to grade video anyway with just a simple contrast and saturation push, and it's as simple as that. I don't use lookup tables or fancy color grading or any way, shape or form, because I like things to look quite neutral, like custom white balance, contrast, saturation, and in post done. And with Canon you can do that, whereas with Sony and Panasonic I do struggle a little bit more.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Carl.
Lookup tables.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there, because you can get the camera to a nice place in far fewer steps, and when you've got clients looking at monitors on set, they just like what they see there and then. You're not kind of making excuses saying, honestly, it's going to look good in post when I've applied the LUT and when I've got rid of that noise and slack and I've done that. Honestly, trust me, it's going to look really good. Whereas you normally, I just show them on the monitor, they look at it and straight away the skin tones are good, and they never seem to be too far away from where you want them to be. And quite frankly, I do very similar to what you just said: contrast, saturation, mild adjustments anyway. And a great starting point, and that was one of the primary reasons why I came back to Canon.
It was, I mean, because recently we've been shooting pre-punched a lot in Canon. We've not even been using in log because we've been on such tight turnarounds. We found it was better, and for the client to review, and also just turning it round. If you shot pre-punched, it looked pretty good. You're 90% there straight off the bat, and
you're using YDR for that, are you?
Yeah, YDR is brilliant. Isn't it? I mean, the white levels are around 75. I find it a kind of a nice compromise between log and the normal standard kind of thing. Is probably a little bit too punchy for me, in camera. But I think the YDR is kind of the perfect balance. And again, from exposure point of view, I don't. We shoot charts and stuff for consistency, but you're in that run and gun situation where you just want reliability quickly. I know that white should be about 75. I stick the waveform monitor on, and it's difficult to almost go wrong. It's just it's easy to expose, a little bit more saturation. So and it's not so different from log, where unless I'm in a scene that's really, really pushing the dynamic range, where you've got real bright highlights, I often prefer just shooting 709 YDR because I think it's an easier workflow, and I think my clients anyway seem to prefer it.
Sure. I'm getting some phone feedback, by the way. Just wanted to you could just check whether your phones are off. While we do that, we are getting quite a few questions coming in. I want to chat a little bit about the R5s just before we get to questions. So I see the questions coming in, everyone watching, don't worry. I'm going to get back to those. But we haven't even spoken about the R5C yet. So what happened with the R5C? How did this little shoot day of yours come about with the pre-release camera?
Do you want to take this one, Lee?
Yeah, Ken. Basically, we've been speaking to Canon about basically when we come over to Canon, we've been going through quite a lot of dialogue with them, and they said, look, we've got this camera's come out. Would you be able to do something for us over Christmas? It just happened. It was quite a tight turnaround, and I had a stills job that I was shooting for Lexus, and we basically we then thought, well, we can do some additional video content for Lexus, and then also put the camera through its paces, and that's what we did. And it was bloody freezing. And it was like 2 days before Christmas. So we chose a shoot where we had about 5 hours of daylight, I think. But again, that sort of helped test the camera's dual ISO, and it was really good to use. I mean, after about 20 minutes, I didn't realise I wasn't shooting stills on the R5. I just completely forgot, and I did the whole still shoot as I would do with my R5, and you couldn't tell any difference.
No.
Does the lack of IBIS bother you at all? I mean, I'm sure that was a question that would have come up anyway, but since we're talking about the stills side of it, that's the feedback I've heard the most from the still side of the camera, is that it's obviously a big loss losing the stabilised sensor for stills. Does it bother you?
No, to be honest, it's one of the things at the moment that I think I've seen quite a bit online of a lot of people objecting to the fact or saying the camera's a deal breaker because it hasn't got IBIS. But I don't know, I struggle with that slightly because when I've shot with cinema cameras in the past, and 90% of what you see on cinema and film, etc., isn't shot with cameras with IBIS. Traditionally, cinema cameras haven't had IBIS. We've only, in effect, as a collective group, had IBIS for 2 or 3 years now, haven't we? So I've always got on really well with the lens IS on the Canon cameras, and even the digital stuff that's on the C70. If I want to need it, it's more than good enough. So it actually works against us. And I think there may be a clip we can bring up, if you can, Carl, on your system that demonstrates a problem where actually IBIS caught us out, and I'll let Lee talk you through it. But the shot you're looking for is the Damon Hill. It's called Damon Hill Jello, I think is the title of it.
There we go. Right, let's run this.
If that's playable, I'll let Lee talk you through it.
Yeah, so basically we had to shoot a DPS opener for the magazine, Motorsport magazine, and we were also shooting video. Now I had the camera. It was similar to what we talked about earlier. It was a rig shot, so I had the camera mounted to the bonnet of the car to get movement in the background. So we shot that, and then we thought, well, we'll get Damon to do a quick lap with it mounted on the bonnet and get some video. And we did that, and I don't know, in the second half of that clip you can see, I mean, that camera was fixed firmly to the bonnet. There's no movement in it. And Silverstone, I don't know if you've ever been there, it's like a bowling green. There's no bumps in it at all, but you can see this starts rocking, sort of even like a seesaw effect. And I mean, it gets worse than what on that clip. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that wasn't usable, really.
We've got the one of it mounted with no IBIS in a different way. Damon also driving around in the car, but that's
if you show that one as a comparison. So that was literally taken 2 minutes later when we just used it was actually the C70. The C70 then with no IBIS, obviously, anyway.
Yeah, that's just handheld.
Yeah. So when you look at the actual quality of that at the moment, that's what you'd expect on a smooth surface like Silverstone with the camera. So quite often, as soon as I know you did a test, didn't you, Carl? Where, what's your test with interest, where you mounted 2 cameras, the R5 and the R5C, on in your own car, I think it was.
Certainly doesn't look anywhere near as cinematic as that. We can roll that if you want, George, though.
But the effect of where you showed the jello on there is just, if you've got any camera with IBIS, and this is not just a Canon issue, when you've got that issue, you're not going to get rid of that jello. And I know a lot of people could say, well, that's okay, that's only really relevant to the guys that are filming cars. But I film horses from things like buggies. I've filmed lots of different things where you're attaching cameras to vehicles or to motorbikes or anything like that anyway. And this jello issue is not something you can get rid of. So I totally appreciate how good IBIS is, and if I was a handheld still shooter shooting slow shutter, I would certainly miss it, and I think IBIS is brilliant at what it does, but it's certainly not the be all and end all for the type of shooting that we do, and it would probably work against us more than it would for us. So when I was probably one of the very few people, I think, that when it said there's no IBIS, I actually rejoiced. Because to be honest with you, if I really want a job that's stable, and in fact, there's a couple of shots there you may find on that slideshow there. One of them's called, there's 3 soldier ones. Carl, I don't know if you can bring those up.
Yes. Soldier Woods.
Not the Woods one. It's the Soldier. The
300 or 400 millimeter.
Yeah, either those. 300 would be good. So the 300 Soldier one's a good one. So this is handheld just with lens IS as I put on there, but this is a 300mm lens, and I'm not the best at hand holding a camera. I don't ever claim to be that, but to me it's a very kind of organic movement. When you've got the lens IS, it doesn't do any of that jello or that kind of fluttering or trying to move the sensor when you don't want it to. So, and I always say, like, hand holding a 300mm lens like that, if it comes out acceptable, and I think that shot did, it's one of those things where, the 400 would again kind of exaggerate it even more, but the 400mm lens shot, again, completely just with lens IS, no digital stabilization, no post-production there anyway, and that's quite a tricky shot to handheld. And IBIS would have done a great job in that situation because I was fairly stationary. But as soon as you start to move the camera, or the camera itself is mounted onto an object or something, I find that's when IBIS can undo you. And so I just purely work on the fact that 90% of the time that I'm shooting, I don't give a message. So that's why I base my
I would like to say actually, on a photography side,
Yes.
I was doing some tests on the shoot. I was doing a couple of interior details on very slow shutters, probably below a 20th of a second, and I was still getting sharp images. So I don't know if you can actually, Carl, if you can go to the tracking shot. I think there's a head-on tracking shot of the Lexus, which has got like a before and after side by side.
Hero Dissolve?
Yes, that's the one.
Called that? There we go.
Is that the still or?
That's
So for instance, there's this one, and there's also a head-on tracking shot, but the stills for that were below a 30th of a second, and I think is the next slide along it showed at 200%.
I can get them in this slide.
It's a side-by-side shot, Carl, with the front two Lexuses, if you like.
Yep, if you cut to my laptop now, George. That one?
Yeah, so you got that shot, that was, if you like, just the straight out of the camera on the left, and it showed on the right, the highlights and the blacks that I could pull back on. And then the very next shot, it will show that shot at 200%. And I mean, that was handheld below a 30th of a second, and I mean that was pin. You can get any pin of that. I mean, it says Lexus on the bottom of the number plate. So,
yeah, exactly. You can read the small text on the number plate.
I mean, I actually normally when I'm doing that sort of shot, I use the R6 because it's got slightly bigger pixels. That normally gives you a better hit rate. But I actually found the C gave me a slightly better hit rate than the standard R5. Now I don't know if that's because it's got the latest firmware,
Interesting.
with the car tracking in, or it was just that it was slightly heavier and slightly broader and more comfortable to hold in my hand. I don't know, but I like I say, I didn't have many problems with missing IBIS, if you like, through stills. I didn't notice.
And were you using stabilized lenses there, or were you using non-stabilized?
Yeah. I was using stabilized lenses.
What do you think that changes if you're using non-stabilized lenses?
No, because I just use a gimbal.
Right.
I mean, it sounds strange, but that is how I kind of see it. It's a bit black and white for me, because if I think, again, if you were maybe a solo shooter that didn't want to invest in gimbals or didn't have any gimbals, and you're shooting handheld all the time, then for sure IBIS is going to help you out and it's going to be a godsend. But I'm firmly in the camp that I think the best kind of quality stabilized motion you'll get will always be on a device like a gimbal. I mean, I use an RS2, but there's plenty of other ones obviously that do a great job, and the whole point to me is these small cameras like the R5C and even the C70 are so easy and quick to mount onto those type of gimbals. If you've got a shot with a lot of motion or something where you're walking or running, I would never normally attempt to do that with just IBIS anyway. I would switch the IBIS off and put it on a gimbal and do a proper job. That's kind of how I see it. So it's another thing where you'd think it would be a big loss to lose the IBIS, but the reality of it is slightly different.
It's like anything. It's horses for courses, really. There will be some guys, some wildlife guys, or guys who use really big lenses a lot that really want the IBIS, but then they may be shooting on an R3 anyway. But I didn't notice it. And for what I do, I didn't notice the difference. In fact, I've got an R5C on order, so I will be using it as one of my main cameras. Which
is interesting. I mean, I don't want to spend the entire talk talking about IBIS, of course, but it is a hotly debated topic with this camera. I guess there's two important points that I want to raise. The first is just coming in from Tomislav, who's talking about it from a still side particularly, because he says it was advertised as a hybrid camera, just saying it's going to be a big miss on the photo side, especially for dynamic shooting and using lenses like the RF 28-70 f2, that kind of lens, which are exceptional lenses but don't have image stabilization in them. You mentioned, Lee, from the photography side of it, that you have pre-ordered a R5C. Do you see yourself still using the R5 and picking up which one for different jobs, or do you think?
No, I mean I've also ordered an R3, so
right,
they're going to be my two. If I'm doing a shot where I'll need the megapixels, I'll use the R5, and you know, if I don't, I'll probably be using the R3 because of the AF eye tracking and stuff, and the weight, and so it's again, horses for courses, but they'll be my normally on a shoot. I'll use both bodies equally. You know, I don't use one and then have one as a backup. I normally have one lens on one lens on the other, and
yeah, it's probably fair to say as well, Carl, that on the still side of it, when we're doing the car stuff and Lee setting up shooting statics or beauty shots, you'll generally err towards the kind of 45 megapixel, you know, the high megapixel body, if you like, anyway, for the statics, and
yes.
Yet the dynamic action stuff, you probably go R6 or R3, and so there is still a valid reason of when you that kind of static type shot with what we call the beauty shots for the cars, then generally they're shot from tripods anyway. So again, it's a thing that you know, it's a fair comment to say that if you're on the, you know, the 28-70 f2 handheld in a dark environment, then you know there is a situation where a straight R5 would be the best camera to use without doubt in that scenario. But it just doesn't.
I mean, I tend to use that lens for still life or static shots anyway, just because, you know, that's sort of my, if you like, my Hasselblad replacement is an R5 with that lens on. You got edge to edge clarity, it's pin sharp, it's basically, I don't know, 12 prime lenses in one lens. And also, you know, I will use the R5C for car to car and tracking action if I need the megapixels. You know, if it's an ad job and we've got a closed road and it's moving, I've got lots of runs and stuff, then I will probably use that just because of the 45 megapixels.
Yeah, but it's going to be the megapixels that's going to make you choose between those cameras rather than stabilization.
Yes, oh, definitely, yeah.
The other thing that I hear time and time again, I certainly got it an awful lot on the IBIS video that we put out, was, but what about turning IBIS off? You know, cameras like the R5 and from competing brands as well do let you turn IBIS off on a camera body that has IBIS in it. What are your opinions for both stills and video, respectively, for that?
I would say, yeah, because from a purely aesthetical point of view, if you switch the IBIS off on the R5, and if we took the Damon Hill shoot there, for example, IBIS was, we tried that both with IBIS on and off, and it doesn't stop the jello. I mean, the fact the physical sensor, even if you switch it off, is still moving around. You can even hear that if you shake the camera. It's that kind of free-flowing IBIS setup that can't be basically changed whether you've got the IBIS on or off. It makes no difference.
Yeah, so the camera tries to keep it in one place rather than trying to stabilize it, but at the end of the day, it's still attached to motorized joints. Which
and Lee's actually got a very funny story. Lee's actually got a very funny story of when he was on a Top Gear shoot, which I'm sure he wants to tell you about the stabilized sensors. Where you go, Lee?
The Top Gear crew were using GH4s for a long time for their in-car, and when the GH5 come out, great, even better resolution and stuff, so that they immediately bought a load and stuck them on the cars, and it was an off-road piece, and when they looked back at the footage, it was shaking all over the place, and they even resorted to super gluing the sensor to the body.
God.
And it's
not
still
recommended at home if you're listening. Please do not do that.
No, and it still had vibration. So
tends to void your warranty.
Yeah, exactly that. Which was partly why the GH5S come out. I think because of the feedback they give.
It's a very good point. I mean, we all were having these exact same conversations a few years ago with over on Panasonic land rather than Canon land.
Yeah,
you know, about the GH5 and the GH5S. You know, this is nothing new. This constant battle between do we want IBIS, do we not want IBIS? Yeah. You know, I think what Canon are doing here, offering two extremely similar cameras, one that does and one that doesn't. I mean, obviously there's more differences than that, but that's a very big difference. Is a nice way to do it.
Yeah, the thing is, we haven't had IBIS, like I said, for a long time, have we? You know, 3 or 4 years ago, there wasn't any IBIS in its true sense. So the excellent technology that goes into all the manufacturers' cameras now that with IBIS, but just look at the footage that you see on TV or any of the cinematic stuff that's shot with Alexas and Canon C500s and the likes of, and none of those have had IBIS. And yet people seem to manage quite well, and yet it seems to be the end of the earth now when Canon have decided to remove the IBIS on this one camera, and everyone thinking, oh, it's a game changer, the camera's going to be a non-starter for them. And I understand if you are just shooting handheld as a solo shooter, I get it, I understand it, but for the majority of people that are going to use the camera in a whole range of situations, on gimbals, off gimbals, all sorts of things, it's not as big an issue, I think, as perhaps being made.
Especially considering the R5 still exists, and the R5, it has problems for video, it has the overheating and all the rest of it in some of its highest quality modes, but it is still, you know, whether the R5C exists or not, the R5 is still one of the best hybrid cameras on the market. It's
brilliant.
This new release does not take away in any way, shape or form how powerful the R5 is, and I think that is something that you can absolutely accuse, you know, people like me of doing and only focusing on the absolutely latest, greatest camera. But I think so. I think it is absolutely worth saying we're not doing down the R5 here. The R5 is a pretty fantastic camera, really is. Yeah. And so if you really want the IBIS, there's a camera there that does 8K RAW, it does 4K HQ. You can chuck all this out to an Atomos. It has Canon Log 3 in it. You know, it is, I suppose, for video you will miss, it's not just the overheating that you'll miss, you will miss the video UI, which I do think makes an incredibly large difference, which I think people forget about a lot on the R5C. And you will miss the Tascam XLR unit, which I really wish they'd introduced earlier to hit the R5 and the R6, because that would be fantastic for those cameras too. Let's talk a little bit about the video UI, because I do think this is something that people forget about a lot, or maybe don't make as big a deal of as they should do. Because for me, I think this is one of the biggest changes, using it for video compared to the R5.
It's the biggest. It's the biggest by I can't begin to tell you. It's huge. I mean, I personally, when people asked me after I'd used the camera, and Canon came back and said, what was your favourite feature? And I said, that little tiny button on the top that switches from, and it's not just the fact that you can switch from video to stills and vice versa, but just it's a massive time saver. And I think both Lee and I have had to say on the shoot, within 3 hours of picking up the R5C and shooting with it, we had Lee in stills mode, where traditionally you'll be shooting on low ISOs, different shutter speeds, different white balances in RAW, certainly not in log. And yet in video we were shooting log and, you know, again, custom white balances. But the fact that the camera seamlessly remembers all the settings from where you were, you can generally pick it up and shoot some stills with it, flick a switch, wait for it to reboot after about 4 or 5 seconds, and when it boots into video mode, all of your settings are retained in the camera. It is literally like having an R5 and a C70. The menus we're familiar with, so anyone who's using the EOS other cameras, C300s, 500s, are immediately familiar with that menu setup, and anyone from a stills background will be very familiar with the Canon stills setup as well. But I just can't underestimate how much of a time saver that is, because invariably when we've made mistakes in the past, it's coming from one mode to another. You flick into video, you go through and think, I've got to change the frame rate, I've got to come out of log, and then the white balance, and you're constantly changing things to get back into your video frame of mind. And it's so often where you just forgot and you think, oh, why is that wrong? Oh damn, I didn't change the shutter speeds was at 100th or 250th, and yet with this one button, flick on there and you're almost back into your default video mode. For me, I would say it is the biggest standout feature on the camera. It's a genius, whoever thought about it, and I don't know why every camera manufacturer doesn't do it.
Yeah, I can't believe it's not been done before. I mean, for instance, on Top Gear, more and more, I'm being asked to shoot a bit of video if I can, just to give them extra coverage. So if I'm on a corner and they fly past in their car, and then they turn around and come back, I might do stills one way. And now I can just switch it into video mode and then shoot a bit of video for them on the way back. Whereas in the past, when I've tried that, invariably I've always had something wrong, like the frame rate or something, because I've had to go into the menu. Right, change this. Right, what frames per second am I on? What codec? White balance? Shutter speed angle. This has got. Obviously, you straight out now. You switch over from the stills menu straight into the EOS menu, and you've got shutter angle, and it's just like using a cinema EOS camera.
Absolutely.
In fact, that shot you showed her on.
So yeah, I was just going to say, it's interesting that example of situation where you're filming. Taking stills one way as the car goes around the track and then video the other way is exactly the sort of situation that I've heard an awful lot of people talk about online as a problem with the R5C, because it takes time to reboot between those two modes. So you're not doing the same as you would do on the R5, where you're just enabling the video recording. You're actually shutting down the camera to reboot up in a completely different operating system, and that takes, I think it's 8 seconds. I think that takes on the current firmware.
Yeah, I mean, I counted 5 seconds when I last time I played with it. 5 Mississippis. Maybe I'm spelling it longer.
This is what maybe you're a very slow speaker saying Mississippi.
Exactly.
But I mean, I purposefully didn't put a timer or anything like that in our coverage on it, because it's a pre-production camera.
Yes, yeah.
We will do things like that and talk about in specifics, but I thought I wanted to wait until the camera was actually shipping for that, because things like
all I would say
this on pre-production.
When I have tried to time it, the one thing I could confidently say is that I couldn't change all the settings in an R5 in under 8 seconds to get it into the mode. So I'd rather the camera shut off and boot up and know the settings are where I need to. I certainly couldn't change all the settings I would need to, even though I'm pretty damn hand with the menu. I wouldn't be able to do that in 8 seconds. So
when you're changing from standard to log, and you're changing your ISOs, and you're changing blah blah blah.
In fact, it happened on the shoot with Lexus, that shot you showed, which was called Hero Dissolve, that you showed earlier on. That there is the still, there is the start of the clip, I believe, if you can by chance find that one again. I think it's called Lexus Heroes Dissolve. It starts off with a still.
There we go.
So that's the still that Lee was shooting.
That was still, and I thought, I'll shoot a bit of video here. So that's the same stretch of road, about 50 meters further along. So I just thought, I might as well shoot a bit of video. Clicked it across.
Let's just watch
and then started
that again,
video.
just paying attention to the color differences. I mean, yes, it was quick to change, but what I was just surprised by then watching that was, one, how good that looks, but that's a process still, and then this looks, if anything, slightly better. I think that looks great.
Well, Ollie thanks,
that's my read. That's my read. Yeah, that's my retouching compared to Ollie's grading.
Oh, sorry.
No, I retouched the still, and for that piece, I thought we were just going to show it log. But Ollie took it on himself to try and match my still with the grade, which normally, I mean, I thought that's going to be virtually impossible to do, but he nailed it somehow. And I even rang him up and said, "Are you sure you want to do that? Do you want to put it there? Because it looks so crunchy. It's not normally how you view video." And he said, "No, I mean, if it was a normal video shoot, he wouldn't grade it to that extreme, but he just wanted to show how much he could crunch it to match a still, which was, I mean, quite incredible job, really.
Yeah, did a good job.
Absolutely. Okay, so I want to get on to some questions now. I'm just digging through to see. Okay, Adam says if you imagine that you are starting from scratch, you have no cameras at all, and you could only buy one of the two, the R5 or the R5C. So you only can have one camera, and you have to choose between the two of them. Which ones would you be picking now for your work?
No brainer.
Well,
Absolute no brainer.
C.
C.
Yeah, it'd be a C for me because it's two cameras in one. It's truly, what I say, it is a hybrid camera.
Yeah.
There we go. Mike says, what are the photo ergonomics likely? So, i.e. having the EVF and half the body pushed back versus the standard R5. This must be the only camera like this with this sort of staggered back, he says.
Yeah, I actually preferred it. I mean, there's a couple of stills. I think the holding page for that you used for this stream shows me doing some details. Okay. And that extra centimetre or whatever it is on the back, I actually find it more comfortable to hold, and it also feels even more balanced. I mean, years ago, I dabbled with the A7 series from Sony, and one of my problems with it was that you'd have full size lenses, and it was such a tiny body that it would just tip forward in your hands. There was no balance to it, so I was always fighting the weight of the lens. But this is really nicely balanced, and yeah, I mean that the extra centimetre that it sticks out around where the screen is, if you like, it gives you more balance, but you don't notice it. I mean, like I said,
because the hand grip's the same.
The hand grip's identical, and so I really did forget that I wasn't using my R5.
And now that you've used the R3 a bit more as well, how do you feel the difference between those two? Because, I mean, they both fix that balance issue in a very different way, the R3 being much chunkier with the vertical grip built in.
They do. I mean, I've not shot the R3 in angry yet. I've just... one arrived on loan yesterday, so I can do a couple of shoots with it while I'm waiting for my order to come in. But yeah, I mean, I've only had a quick play, but I mean, it's just I grew, if you like, through my career. I used the 1D series more than any other camera, so I'm very familiar with that body shape.
Feels like home.
It does, but then on the R5, I've not purchased a grip because that was so nicely balanced. I don't really need a grip. I quite like the way it is. So the R3 is a different layout, but it's equally as comfortable, I'd say, to use as this.
Very good. So Marius is saying, is there any difficulty in focusing on vehicles when you're shooting video on the Canon R5C? So I guess that's referring to the video stills tracking that we had in the R5, and it would detect vehicles. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Again, Lee would be better, probably best to answer that one on the still side of it. But from the video perspective, obviously there is a difference because the vehicle tracking that you enable in stills mode isn't the same as obviously if you put it in video mode. So,
object tracking, basically.
Object tracking, but again, it's one of those things where I found from car to car or panning shots or doing that, I find the object tracking really good on that camera. I mean, one thing I did pick up online is there seemed to be a lot of debate around what was the autofocus like compared to, say, the C70 and the R5. And I would kind of say I wanted to, we were under NDA at the time, and I was kind of shouting at the screen wanting to be a keyboard warrior and come back and say no, you're wrong.
So you're about to let loose, are you?
I was about to unleash on the thing, but I tried to hold my fingers back off the keyboards because the R5, I mean, it's a phenomenal autofocus system, isn't it? It's probably the best autofocus system I've ever used on any camera, and so that's kind of the gold standard, if you like. And it's better than the C70. The C70 is great, and in low light sometimes it may struggle where an R5 wouldn't. So I wouldn't hand on heart say that the C70 autofocus is as good as the R5 because it clearly isn't, but it's good for what we do for again 90% of it. Now, when I heard that the people said, "Oh well, there's no dual pixel in on the R5C, it's not the same as the R5," it isn't. but it's not the system out of the C70 either. It is. I was told and reliably informed that it is a kind of a hybrid system that's been developed by the video division of Canon. But having had the cameras, 3 cameras side by side, and Lee and I have both checked all 3 of them, I would say it's definitely somewhere in between the two, but nearer to the R5 than the C70. So how they've quite done it, I don't know, but it's certainly not a poor brother of an autofocus system. And we tried lots of object tracking inside the car, on the car, and of course Lee was using the vehicle tracking on the still side of it, and the object tracking was really good. So I think it's closer to the R5 than it is the C70.
Yeah, and Ollie in my chats with him has said the same thing. I mean, I guess it's because, software isn't everything. So it might use a similar software to the C70 rather than the R5, but it's all about the processor, it's all about the sensor, those sorts of things as well, all working in tandem. I'm going to do a bunch of autofocus tests for the channel once we get the camera back soon. I'm going to get 3 of the exact same RF lens, get the 3 camera bodies, the R5, the C70 and the R5C all in one place, side by side with each other, and, do the normal interview setup, walking to and from the camera, that kind of thing. I'll definitely try and make sure that we do some object tracking in that as well, rather than just people and face. But it is definitely going to be interesting to see where that sits, because as you say, that is a large part of what people are saying about the camera so far.
If I had one request, probably it would be from Canon. If it was, and I don't even know if it's possible. I've spoken to Barry about it and given our feedback. Is it would be lovely, and we always want what we can't have. But the vehicle tracking that Lee's used in the stills, and he was on a shoot in America last week, and it was absolutely nailing pin shot photos time after time using the vehicle tracking. It would be lovely to be able to have that in video mode. At the moment, just be able to figure it out. I think that would be one of my top of my wish list.
Is something that I haven't really used much of. I saw some people at launch saying it's more to do with race cars with graphics over them and that kind of car. You use it on normal cars like the Lexus you were photoing.
Yeah. I used it on the Lexus and it nailed it, and maybe that was why the hit rate was slightly better than the R5's hit rate. But when I was away 2 weeks ago in America, we did shoot some race cars, but I shot a lot of non-race cars, and I used it quite a lot, especially if a car was coming at me. I was at the side of the road and a car was coming at me. It basically just draws a box around the whole vehicle, so it was head on, so there's no stickers and stuff anyway. I could just fire away, and then I was double checking, and it was following the car really well. I'll be using it quite a lot, I must admit.
There's a little clip there, Carl. If you've got the other thing that I found, one thing that's worth mentioning is where it was very good at is there's a shot you may have in that asset library there called, I think it's called Lexus Bend Slow Mo. That's the name of it from memory. Now, if that one could come up, that's because traditionally the cameras that shoot in this is 120 frames a second. And it's, we clicked on it, nails the number plate when that car's actually travelling quite quick. It's a professional driver going around the corner reasonably quickly, and yet the autofocus, again, in 120p, traditionally that's a weak point, isn't it? When a lot of cameras, you put them into high frame rate mode, the autofocus just turns to mush straight away. But my experience in the 2 days we had with that camera on the shoot is that even in 120p, the autofocus is reliable at tracking vehicles and hangs on to it, even with object tracking. So.
Sure.
And that was handheld as well. So
and exactly the sort of shots that I imagine you were talking about earlier, Lee, for Top Gear. That kind of whizzing around the track, just grab one quick bit of video, and it's almost certainly going to be used as part of quite a fast montage. It's just so useful. Some more questions coming through. So Luca has said, what media is recommended for the R5C? You can obviously use either SD cards or CF Express cards. If you want to go CF Express cards, it's not as expensive nowadays as you would think based on CF Express even last year. In fact, there's one card that's been released which is really starting to change that by Angelbird called the SE, which is there's not a series of cards. There's just one card called the SE, which is 512 gigabytes big, and it's got 800 megabytes a second sustained write speed, which
wow.
is enough to do every single mode, including 8K RAW 60p in the
Yeah.
R5C. And, you know, I think that's, let me just try and find it.
That's going to be good. I mean, that sounds like the
Yeah.
perfect card. Not used. I mean, I use these. I've got the one in front of me, which is funny enough an Angelbird. It's the Angelbird. This one's a 256 gig. I think Lee uses the same one. And again, I mean, it's just ridiculous when we think of, you know, 8K RAW internally. This camera obviously offers HDMI output if you're going to go to, say, a Ninja V as well. So the options, when you consider you've got an excellent option to go out for res RAW. Instant on CF Express and on the SD cards, for those that are interested that probably have invested in those, I find that V60 rated cards shoot pretty much every mode on the camera, bar maybe the very most demanding ones. So the top end ones where you are recording 8K, I just say there's no real reason to not use a decent V90 card. And from my experience, the two most reliable at the moment have been the Angelbird and the Pro grade cards. Have both been faultless. I've had a couple of issues with some Kingston cards where it comes up with a warning on the screen saying it was running out of memory buffer in camera card slot A, and I'm reliably informed that was down to the fact that even though it's rated as a V90 card, I don't think the performance of it, I think there's V90 and there's V90, I don't think all V90s are equal. So generally I've used the Angelbird and the Pro grades, although I've heard the Sony Tough cards as well have been pretty good from what I can hear. So they're the three brands that I know that I've heard people use, but I personally have used the Pro grade and the Angelbird and had no problems at all.
Echo that. This is the, if we can cut George to my laptop, this is the Angelbird
Oh right,
CF
nice.
Express card I was just talking about. But yeah, this price point for
That's cheap. That is
a
amazing.
512 gigabyte CFast card is exceptional.
Yeah,
and
that's really good.
that would be a firm recommendation for me. I've tested it with the R5C specifically, and it's recorded everything. I chucked at it absolutely fine. No problem.
I actually purchased the Angelbird that Stuart's got there. I've got two of them. I purchased them for video, but I use them for stills. For when I need to shoot raw 20 frames a second, covering fire as we call it in the industry.
Yep.
No buffering at all. As smooth as butter, and then if I need to shoot a bit of video, it's
they do this version, which is the stills equivalent of it, if you like. Same thing, limited range, only one card. It's the SX. It's 160 gigabytes. So this prioritizes fast bursts rather than sustained for video. Again, at a good price. But at the end of the day, the SE one that's 512 is still pretty fast.
Yeah.
So, considering you're going from 160 gigabytes to 512 gigabytes for the exact same price, it's still faster than any SD card that you can get at all. It's a pretty good choice, I think. Okay, let's pick out a couple more questions. Barry's been doing a fantastic job in the comments answering a lot of these, so thank you.
Nice one, Barry. Thank you for attending.
Well done, Barry.
Wenjun says, what about the dynamic range of the R5C in very high dynamic range situations or in a low light situation? Does it feel it can keep up to the C70? George, could you play that clip we were just looking at of the car going along in the sunset? Because that has got some definite dynamic range.
That was dark. I mean, that was very low light.
There's you're not using any lights there, are you? That's natural.
No.
In front of a sunset.
No.
Yeah. I tell you one thing I will say, there's definitely, and I've not managed to pinpoint it even with Canon yet, but it was funny that independently, Ollie noticed it when he was shooting the BTS of that, the main video there. Lee noticed it and I noticed it. We all collectively came together and said, is it me or is there a perceived increase in dynamic range in the C compared to the R5? And even though I said, no, it can't be, it must be us because the R5 is in a sense the same camera, but then it was explained that maybe the video side of it is come from the video engineers in Canon that have used their interpretation of probably log and everything else on the camera. And it's not just me, because Ollie's noticed it and Lee's noticed it as well, that I think there is an improved dynamic range on the C, even compared to the R5. And don't get me wrong, I mean, my C70 is my favourite camera. I love what the DGO sensor does, how it manages that roll off and that lovely creamy kind of top end is not been bettered by any camera that I've used, and it's still from that point of view my favourite camera. But the C comes very, very close. I'm not sure if you did a technical test and you did a.
We did. You know, we've loaded them in actually.
Have you? Great. If you got it, I mean, I'm not sure if I would probably say there's still probably a stop and a half or so's difference in what one can do over the other.
What we've got in 8K RAW, I noticed very little difference in dynamic range at all, apart from in underexposure where the R5 went a bit magenta. You know, this is software stuff. This is them tweaking their software rather than the sensor's dynamic range. But then in 4K HQ mode, there was a definite difference. You know, it's not too different, but there is definitely a smoother roll off from the clipped areas to the non-clipped areas on the R5C, whereas the R5 clips that a little bit more in 4K HQ.
And that was, I'm glad I've not seen that test before, but that kind of bore out exactly. It just seemed to have that nice kind of a bit nicer on the roll off, and I was really impressed with it. It was a lot closer to the C70 than I actually gave it credit for when I first picked it up. So it was a pleasing thing, and I personally think at the moment how they've done it I don't quite know, but the image in the 4K, I know in the R5, one of my favourite image modes was with the 4K high quality mode, because it used that downsampled kind of 8K sensor without any line skipping. Well, all of the modes in 4K on the R5C now use that same downsampling, and I believe even the HD is downsampled from the 8K. So I even flicked it into HD just to see, and it's a beautifully clean image. I mean, 8K looks sensational and it was great, don't get me wrong, but the 4K mode, I've not seen a mode on the camera yet where there's a compromise. You know, you normally say, oh, that's good, but that's turned a bit soft, or you've cranked the frame rate up to 120 and said, oh, you can see it didn't seem to have that kind of drawback to it. So that was one of the things just on the picture quality alone. I prefer the image on the C to the R5, even though I own an R5. That's why I've ordered an R5C.
I mean, when the R5 came out, I did a bunch of these technical tests on it and was pretty blown away, really, about the quality of the 4K HQ mode and the 8K in the camera. You know, I compared it to the A7S, the A1, the S1H, cameras like that, and it's really impressive what Canon have done on it. But on the R5, it overheated, and yes, they addressed it in firmware updates and it got a lot better, and we've got a lot of customers using it purely for video that have been very happy with it and haven't run into overheating problems. But you push it hard enough, it will overheat and it will drop out in those modes, not in every mode, but in those modes. Whereas the R5C, yes, we can argue whether it's slightly better or not backwards and forwards. I think it definitely is slightly better, by the way. But at the end of the day, that almost doesn't matter. If it's the same quality even, but it doesn't have any of those problems, and you can shoot 8K RAW as long as you want, with never running into any problems, that's huge, because that 8K RAW is stunning.
I did it. The first thing I did, and it probably wasn't the best thing to do with the camera, but when I took it out of the box when the courier had arrived, one of the first things I did is, right, let's see if I can get this thing to overheat. And I connected up to a USB power source and just put my biggest CF Express card I could in there, and I just set it up and left it running. And other than I ran it into the full 256 gig card was full, without any problems whatsoever, and I just thought, well, okay, that just wouldn't happen on, you know, potentially on an R5 you wouldn't be able to run for that extended time, and it just didn't seem to miss a beat, and so certainly didn't miss a beat on the shoot when we were shooting with it for 2 days. But yeah, the very first thing I did is, let's see if we can get this to run, and it ran an 8K clip until the card filled up. I changed the cards and just kept repeating the exercise for about 2.5 hours, and it didn't miss a beat. So
absolutely,
it's just that I think Lee made a real valid point in something he said to me the other day, and that's, if you're going to shoot with a hybrid camera, quite a lot of people may have just one camera to use for stills and video. And I know if Lee was on a shoot and you had a problem that could be maybe overheating, or it could be just a time limit issue, Lee used to sort of be really fearful, I know, on the shoots when he's going into some of those high frame rate modes and the 8K modes, because if that camera goes down through overheating or for any other reason, he's then lost both his cameras. He's lost his stills camera and his video camera, the same thing. And I know that's a big thing with this camera. So I think we don't need to underestimate the difference this makes with this R5C.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, this camera is basically unlocked all their modes. So it's for me, it's like the R5 didn't have them modes, and this does, because I'd be so scared of using them modes that I just didn't use them. So it's like this camera's come with them modes on top.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's some interesting chat going on, which I just want to address a little bit between Barry and Carl and Nick. In the, I've been trying to sort of keep up with what the conversation that they're having with each other in the chat whilst still doing our conversation here. So apologies if I've missed anything either side there. But what they basically seem to be saying is it's about this 8-second swap between the modes, which I am still hopeful that Canon are going to trim a little bit over time. But let's assume they're not going to improve it, and it is 8 seconds to swap between stills and video. Nick says for his use case, he shoots a lot of fashion and records little clips in between still shoots and shots to do a video from the shoot. And he says it sounds like he can't do that. I don't want to tell customers that they're wrong. I really, really try not to do that. And what I would encourage you to do, though, Nick, is to try one in that situation. Give it a chance. I think my opinion would be, and of course it is just my opinion, but my opinion would be it's 8 seconds. If you're talking to your model, if you're talking to things around, all those things normally take longer than 8 seconds. So in that example, for example, if I had a portrait model in front of me and I was doing a few stills, and then I said to them, look, I'm just going to swap over to video now. Could you, turn your head when I say now? Something as simple as that. That probably took me 8 seconds to say that.
It took 12, because I just timed it.
It took 12, there we go. So if I had the camera, because it is just a physical switch on the top of the camera. You don't need to look at what you're doing, even. You literally, you can feel it without looking at it. You just switch it while you're talking. You won't even have to look at the camera. I reckon most people will not be bothered by that 8 seconds in the real world, swapping between them. It often takes 8 seconds just to even think about what you're going to do next, even in the most fast-paced environments like weddings and things like that.
And I would also say to Nick as well, just time himself from, if he did, set the camera up as you would in a studio in his fashion shoot, and then shoot some stills, and then obviously add to the time of time yourself, basically switching it into video mode, but more importantly making those changes you would have to make to then put it in the correct mode to use for video. And I think that's where you'll find in the real world that we found it was much quicker just to flick the switch, let it boot up, than it ever was to try and reprogram the camera.
It all depends as well. I mean, we don't know what Nick's workflow is. I mean, I don't know if he's doing it stealthily and not even telling the model, and it doesn't really matter what if the settings are bang on to match any other cameras or stuff. But I think you'll be surprised, because it sounds, when you say it's 8 seconds, it definitely didn't perceive 8 seconds when I was doing it. Whenever I've been switching it didn't feel like 8 seconds.
Kyle is asking, you've got to go back. Adam is asking, will the settings remain the same if you're switching backwards and forwards between those two systems, stills and video? So that's some do and some don't. Is that right? How does that work? I can't remember now off the top of my head.
I'd have to literally have the camera in front of me and test it. I certainly, when we were on the Lexus shoot and doing it, then I don't remember anything that wasn't carried over. So, because Lee was using it for stills and then we were shooting video with it, and I wasn't aware that anything wasn't coming over. But don't quote me on that, as in I'd need the camera in front of me. Maybe Barry could answer that in the techie thing as to whether all Barry of the settings.
Off the top of my head. Come on, Barry, answer the question. off the top of my head, I think what happens is that it keeps your common settings, the ISO, the IBIS, that kind of thing, changes it to angle or whatever like that if you use your shutter, and then changes the more behind the scenes ones, like your picture profiles, that kind of thing, and resolution and all the rest of it. Okay, let's just have a little look. One thing I would say, I mean, there are situations here. So Kyle, for example, says the R5 switches in milliseconds for kisses at weddings, hits and football games, that kind of thing. One of my first pieces to Canon and of feedback to Canon was that I would like some sort of video mode and video recording inside the stills mode, where with an assignable button or something like that, you could start recording a quick video clip with the exact settings that you've got there. Now, it wouldn't necessarily be the oversampled, it wouldn't be anything like that. It might even just be the equivalent of the regular 4K line skipped or something like that. But
or what if you could assign a button in the video mode that would just fire the shutter for a still, like a digital shutter?
There's lots there that they could do. I imagine, because in the video, it gets some, when you start trying to think about it like an engineer, it gets very complicated because of the two completely different user interfaces. So for that example, firing a shutter inside the video mode, the engineers with that operating system would never have run up against that before the R5C, because it's a Cinema EOS one, and so the screen grab.
If you're shooting in 8K, shooting in 8K, you can always use a screen grab from your 8K footage.
But on the still side of the camera, that functionality is there, because there's cameras like the R5 where you can press an assignable button and very quickly be swapping to a video mode. So I'm hopeful that they could potentially add that on this still side. I don't. It's certainly something I've passed on to Canon, and I would say anyone that really wants that and thinks. I mean, Carl says yes, exactly, in capital letters. It's the only reason holding me back from buying one.
I mean, I can see how it would be handy, especially if you've got it in kind of one of the standard profile modes.
Sorry, Stuart, you were talking there.
No, I was just saying. Absolutely, I can see the use of it, and I can see then that as long as you have the camera in a reasonable profile in the stills mode, to be able to fire off video without rebooting would be ideal for that situation. Obviously, the real kind of capturing, just a few seconds, but again, I still come back to the fact that 8 seconds isn't a long time to switch. I'd sooner have
But also, I mean, just buy the R5.
Well,
shoot video,
the R5
4K video all day long in it, and like you say, you can assign a button in stills mode and do that. I mean, what we're talking about, if you like, we're always after the perfect camera, but all the things we're talking about are in them two cameras. So
there is never going to be
such
a thing as a perfect camera. There are so many different shooters, and also just take the three of us on this call. What's the perfect camera for me is not going to be the perfect camera for either of you, and what's the perfect camera for either one of you two isn't going to be the perfect camera for the other person. What we all do is different. What we all do, what we all prefer in using it is different, and so the perfect camera will never exist.
I think the main thing is, though, Carl, is that we're getting closer and closer to there always tends to be we're not kind of getting there. I don't think we will get there, like I said, because there's always something we want. And I was at a talk a couple of days ago, and I said it's funny how we just don't have to step back in time very long, where we were in a world of 8-bit cameras, and we were all poo-pooing 8-bits, and the image falls apart, and what we need is 10-bit, and then they gave us 10-bit, and then they said, of course 420 is no good, we want 422, and then 422's evolved into RAW, and then you look at the camera, and you switch it on and think, hang on, we've got 8K 60p RAW in a camera in such a small body, and we're still.
You only have to go back a few years where there wasn't a camera that could do that didn't cost 50 grand. It's
and
very,
we shouldn't lose sight of that. The perfect camera doesn't exist, but the compromises are getting less and less and less.
And the thing is, as well, we haven't touched on is if you've got EF glass, this camera's even better because you can just get the EF adapter with the ND variable ND in it.
Literally just trying to say, let's just before we wrap up talk about ND, because I think that is the other really important piece of the puzzle which we haven't discussed yet. Is ND. I mean, so I've been asked a huge amount since the beginning of the R5C, since the launch of the R5C, where customers that were about to pull the trigger on the C70 now have all of a sudden gone, oh, I really like the look of that R5C. What are the differences between them? And I think ND is one of the major ones. Because the built-in NDs on the C70 are just so useful. They really are.
Brilliant. Yeah.
What do you guys think about that mount that takes EF lenses and gives you the drop-in variable ND?
It puts me in a bit of a quandary personally, because I've got a lot of EF glass. So with my setup with both the C70 and the R5, I've got the standard adapter with no glass, no speed boosting thing. The speed booster, I didn't buy the drop-in ND one, although because I didn't really want that feature obviously on the C70, I want to use the same adapter across both bodies. If I was just an R5 owner, the drop-in NDs, I tested it and it's a really good adapter. I'm not sure how it was going to work long term, because it was always my intention to switch some of my glass over from EF to RF. And then when you realise obviously you can't then use the adapter with the RF, it would be great if you had an RF adapter with a very ND in there. That probably would be the elixir, wouldn't it? But I'm not sure whether that's even possible. But so for the guys predominantly using EF glass, or
I don't know how they did it, but they managed to stick variable NDs behind an RF lens mount, which is
they've got it. So I would say if it's doable. That was one of my requests that came through on the feedback, is that if they made a mount, I think Canon would be surprised of how many people would then shift from EF to RF, because there is some definite advantage in going between the two if they could get that variable ND kind of adapter to work with RF. I think it would be really good. But I mean, it's okay for me because I use a lot of EF glass and even vintage glass, so I'm using the adapters more often than I'm actually using RF at the moment. But again, I can see people, I know a lot of people I read online said, oh, it's a real shame they don't do that adapter, but for RF.
Yeah,
and
they will never
comment.
be able to do an adapter because of the flange distance of the lens and the rest of it. It's not physically possible. It would have to be an ND system inside the camera behind the lens mount, like it is on the C70. So the question becomes, can they fit that inside a smaller body? Because although the C70 isn't exactly large, it is bigger than an R5C. And can they do it with a full frame sensor? Because obviously the C70 is Super 35. I was having this conversation with Philip Bloom actually a couple of days ago, and he pointed out the Ronin. So have you seen the Ronin 4D? The DJI Ronin 4D, the gimbal camera.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah,
extraordinaire. Very interesting camera. But if you take just the camera head of that is, I mean, it hasn't got all the electronics of the rest of the camera. That's all back behind the gimbal. But in the head is the sensor. Is not a variable ND system, but a drop-down ND system in front of a large format sensor with up to 10 stops or something crazy on it as well, and a short enough flange lens mount that you can put E-mount lenses on it. So very short, as shorter probably than RF is. And they've managed to get all three of those things: a large format sensor, an ND system, and that short flange mount, lens mount, all in that same real estate, which I think gives us hope that it can be done. But we've never seen Canon do it, and we've never seen Sony do it or Panasonic do it. No.
So also, I mean, you've got to remember, I don't know how that will affect the stills side of the camera, because obviously that's another plane of something in front of the sensor.
Who knows? And
then that would have to disengage when you switched it across, maybe, or it's one of them things that we want every camera to be perfect, but that if that was the case, no one would buy any of the range. They'd just buy one camera. The C70's got XLR inputs in the body, and it's got the NDs on it. This is a lot smaller camera, I don't know if I know any cameras that size really that have built-in NDs.
No, the C70 is one of the smallest, unless you start looking at things like the Ronin, which obviously it's not a complete camera system, just that top head bit. Okay, so how are you guys going to be using ND when you're out and about using the R5C when you
Yeah,
get delivery of it.
I'm kind of used to using the Vari ND systems anyway. From I've got a Tiffin one, a Polar Pro one.
Right.
There's some
So
excellent
you're
ones out
using
there.
screw-on variable NDs on
Yeah.
the front of
Yeah,
it.
Got
that's it,
that.
and
Got
just-
got the bright tangerine and the lightweight one.
Yep.
The
That's
little matte box
the
on the end.
Misfit, the Snap-on.
The
Misfit,
Misfit.
Yeah. And there's one thing I find with those Vari NDs. I mean, I've used them for years, right going back to the 5D Mark II days, where we're all kind of using Vari NDs, screwing at NDs, and I find it's just something you tend to get used to, don't you? And even though I miss it because I love the C70 for the fact that it is a great setup, and my run and gun setup for corporate stuff and running around with soldiers or whatever might well be the C70 is the quickest camera I've got to use, but the other thing I tend to like when I'm not using that camera, and I'm on, say, the C or even the R5, is with a Vari ND system, once I've got the aperture and everything, all the things I want fixed anyway, riding the ND, as I call it, just at the end, is actually quite a straightforward thing to do. And I'm really just comfortable with it now that you're just focusing purely on, is shot in focus, so focus and ND, and you just find that it's a natural place for my hand to sit with my left hand to ride the ND and the focus. So yeah, I quite enjoy, I know lots of people say, oh, I hate it, I much prefer internal ND. I don't know. It's practical. It's much quicker in the C70. Don't get me wrong. And if it could be built into the camera, great. But it's not a big sacrifice to have a decent quality one. No, it's not a deal breaker. It never has been, really.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Okay, I think that is a great place to wrap it up. But I mean, you guys said you have both ordered an R5C, haven't you? So maybe we'll start back up this conversation again in a few months' time once we've got a few months under our belt of using one.
Great.
I don't know about you, but I'm very much looking forward to getting my hands back on it again.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to your test, Carl, when you do the test with all the autofocus stuff.
Yes.
To see the
Coming up.
Because I know what we think. In fact, we had it for 2 days. I mean, we had the sum total was 2 days worth, but it was an impressive camera from Canon. Should be applauded for what they've done in the timescale. And I think a lot of people are going to be quite happy when they get hands. I think it's end of March-ish, isn't it, for supplies into you guys?
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to mine. I'm sure as long as the pre-orders are flying in as they are.
Yep, they absolutely are. It's going to be a popular camera, this one, I think. And I had the camera for a bit longer than those 2 days you mentioned that you had it for, but we were testing so many stuff. And the trouble that I always find when testing cameras like this from Canon is that the autofocus is almost so good that I don't pay that much attention when I'm testing the camera to the autofocus, because I just sort of go, I know that's good. I want to look at all the other bits. And that's literally what happened here. Is I barely tested the autofocus at all, not at all, and then got to the end of it and went, oh yeah, that would have been good. But we will see once I can get the camera back, which will be very shortly. I'm looking forward to doing that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for your time today. It's some really useful insights on the cameras there from both a stills and video point of view. That's what I've enjoyed about this chat, is that it's so often that we focus so heavily on the video side of things on this channel and at Pro V. So one, being able to talk about the still side of the camera a bit more openly, but also having people that do swap between those two as a hybrid user quite frequently. It's been really good to chat that through. So thank you very, very much for your time.
No, good. It's been a pleasure. It's been good fun.
Thank you. Yeah, enjoyed it.
Right, so everyone watching at home, if you have any more questions at all, or if you're watching this after the fact and you've got a burning question that you want to ask us, please do leave it in the comment section down below and we will get back to you as we go. But for now, thank you very much for watching. Thank you, Barry from Canon, who has been at home answering a load of questions in the chat. Thank you all for watching. And if you want to buy an R5C, of course, head over to Pro V and we will be happy to help you out. And take care. I'll see you very soon. Bye.